Hello there, welcome to the Meaningful Stitch. My name is Amy Palco and I'm coming to you from Edinburgh, Scotland. This is the second episode. The first episode went out a couple of weeks ago and I just want to say thank you so much for receiving it so beautifully. So many people watched and commented and subscribed, and I'm just incredibly grateful for your reception and for your welcome. It was a truly lovely surprise and really quite breathtaking in its scale. So thank you. I hope that you enjoy the second episode just as much. I certainly have lots to share with you. But before I do that, I would like to share a card reading with you. So my work in the world is as a goddess guide, and which basically means that I help women to look at the world through the lens of archetype so that they can make choices about their lives. And so I use archetype cards and oracle cards quite often in my work, and so that's why I like to start these podcasts with one. And this is the one that I'm using today. You can see it's called the Wild Kuan Oracle, and it's another deck by Alana Fairchild. Like last time we looked at the Sacred Rebels Oracle, so that was also by Alana Fairchild. The artwork on this though is really quite different. It's incredibly beautiful, and the card that I chose for us for today is this one. It says, "Her joy renders the impossible task possible." Isn't it absolutely beautiful? And the words in the guidebook are also incredibly beautiful, so I would just like to share those with you before we begin on exploring more knitting. It says, bliss, happiness, joy. These are high frequency, high states of being which cannot be contrived, and yet, despite what mainstream culture tends to think, are not dependent on our life circumstances. That is great and powerful teaching, and perhaps one of the most radically freeing teachings the Divine Mother can ever bestow upon us. To learn to feel joy in our hearts without having to have a particular reason for it is the beginning of access to a great spiritual power. To be able to tap into the frequency of joy, of simple delight in being alive, and utter appreciation, reverence, and gratitude for the humour, diversity, and beauty, even the confounding, inexplicable mystery of creation, is remarkable. There may be darker times, darker emotions that will be your companions at different times upon your life journey. Sometimes those darker companions will feel even more familiar and constant to you than the joy always gurgling beneath the surface of your life experiences. It requires a strong and compassionate will to honour all you feel without denying the darker emotions that will come and go at times, whilst also deciding to gently but firmly bring yourself back into connection with the joy that exists within always, just like the sun behind the ever-shifting clouds in the sky. So, here we go. So my focus has really been on joy over this last week in particular, and I've really been wondering about where joy lives in my life and how I can allow myself to experience more of it. And certainly one of those places is in my knitting and in my exploration with yarn and my true love and passion for all of that. And so one of the ways in which I've been doing that is I've had a couple of new cast-ons. I've got a new cast-off to show you as well, but also wrapping myself up in some of my most favourite pieces. And so that's what I want to begin with today and just share this beautiful wrap. That's inside out. There we go. This is the Hohi Locatelli Starting Point wrap. It's a big piece. It uses 5 skeins of fingering weight, and it was released as a mystery knit-along. So if you've ever participated in a mystery knit-along, you'll know that they're great fun. Different clues are released over the course of a period of time, normally about a month or so, and you all knit in community with one another, and the pattern is revealed to you the more that you knit. However, it can be a little problematic in choosing your colours, and I certainly had this problem also. So the colours that I chose, I actually dyed up with one of my friends, and we purchased some Blueface Leicester 4-ply superwash, and we dyed it in pots in her kitchen, and we had a lovely rich purple, a few gradations on that purple, a bright gold cut shade, and a speckled skein also of purple and gold. They looked fantastic in the skeins, and I was really excited about it, and I knitted this beautiful wrap, which you can see is not purple and gold. And once I had completed it, I tried it on, and I took a photograph and sent it to my friend, and we laughed because it looked like I had become the high priestess of Cadbury's caramel, which is the colour of a chocolate bar wrapper. So I didn't really wear it very much, I have to say, because the colours weren't really my colours. They weren't colours that I wore very often. And so it languished in my cupboard for a little while, but that felt a bit sad because I did really love the wrap and I loved the pattern. The yarn felt really beautiful and it was very cosy and warm, but I just never wore it. And so I decided that I was going to over-dye it. So I went back to my friend's kitchen and we took out the pots again, and we took out a dye pot of vermilion, and we boiled up the water and we over-dyed this wrap. So the wonderful thing about it was that because we had already dyed the yarn in all of these different colours and it had all been knitted up, when we dyed the vermilion over the top of it, the different colours took the dye differently, and so I ended up with this beautiful wrap in shades of dark purple through to kind of like a burnt orange, and with some peachy shades of pink and purple all the way through. And now it's one of my absolute favourites. I wear it so often, and really our weather is just beginning to properly turn now, and you're starting to see the leaves on the trees starting to change into yellow and red. The wind has picked up, the temperatures have dropped, the rain has returned, and so this kind of wrap where you can just absolutely envelop yourself in it feels like the most delicious hug, and the colour I just absolutely love. And it didn't feel like too much of a risk, to be honest, because if I hadn't dyed it, I wouldn't have worn it, which is the complete truth. And if the vermilion had been a complete disaster, then my next plan was to dye it all black, and then I would have had a black wrap. So that was the plan. But fortunately, I didn't have to do that, and the vermilion was absolutely perfect. I think you'll agree. So there we go. That's the enormous starting point wrap by Joji Locatelli. Huge amount of fun, and I do highly recommend it, even although it's a pattern that came out a while ago and so is no longer a mystery. It's still a lot of fun to knit. The second thing that I'm wearing that I want to share with you is my finished object, which is this. This is the Velicor by Andrea Mowry. I knitted it in Garthenor number 1, which is a single ply, heavy lace weight, I suppose, Shetland, in chalkboard, which is this lovely dark espresso colour. Then I've got this silvery shade here, which is a yarn from Iona wool, and this is silver weaving, although when I looked on their website I see it's actually listed as sock wool, so I think you still can get it. And then this bright hot pink shade here is Skein Queen's Wriggle lace, and it was a leftover from a shawl that I knitted for my grandmother, and I spoke about that in last week's podcast. What I thought was really interesting about this fabric that's been created with these different yarns is that this silver one was the one that had spinning oil still in it, and so it did feel a little bit toothy, a little bit scratchy. I know we're not supposed to use that word, but it did feel a little bit rough against the skin. However, when it was washed and blocked, it has bloomed so beautifully, I'm so pleased with the fabric that's been created. It feels just lovely against my skin. And it's super warm as well, so I've got a little long-sleeved t-shirt on underneath it today to keep me nice and cozy. But I'm so pleased with it, and I love this slash neckline, which is really created because you're knitting two squares, so the back and the front are the same, and then you're doing a 3-needle bind off for the shoulder seams. And I took quite a long time doing my 3-needle bind off because I wanted to make sure that my ribbing was matching and that it was all even. And the other thing that I took my time over was the picking up of my stitches for my sleeve, because I really wanted quite a sharp, defined angle, and I'm really pleased with what I got. So this is the Vellicore. It's supposed to be, I think it's a word that refers to books, and so, which I really love, because this is like the pages of a book. So I'm really pleased with how it's turned out, and I think I'll get a lot of wear out of it over the winter time, being able to wear over dresses and long sleeve tops. It's a lovely layering piece, I think. So there you go, that's what I'm wearing, the Vellicore and the starting point. So that's what I have been knitting. What am I knitting now? Well, first thing to show you is this. This is the half and half triangles wrap that I'm knitting in Holst Super Soft. And I'm using this lovely shade of, you see that there? Oh wow, that's a good representation of the colour. I'm knitting it in Sweet Pea. And then my second colour is going to be this one here, which is Cinnamon. I'll just hold those two up together so you can see how they look together. Isn't that so pretty? I'm really loving how those are playing together. The Holst Super Soft, again, is a yarn that still has its spinning oil in it, and so it does have quite a dry handle. It feels almost crunchy, which is perhaps not necessarily a yarn that you would choose to wear up next to your neck. However, I've been reliably informed that when you wash it, it blooms beautifully and softens, and so I'm quite excited to see that process. I have made a few modifications, like I spoke to in my last podcast, which is that I'm slipping the last stitch on the edge with my yarn held forward, and that's creating this smooth edge without the garter bumps. The second modification is that I'm using German short rows rather than wrap and turns. So I'm quite interested to see the difference that makes also. So it's a lovely, enormous wrap. You can see that I've done quite a lot here, and actually I don't have too much to go. Every single stitch is wrapped, so I don't have too much to go before I complete the first half of that. I can show you an image of it here. This is the half and half triangles wrap, and it's a free pattern from Pearl Soho. And I was introduced to it by Debbie Korb on the Caddy Jacks podcast, who was interviewed a couple of weeks ago. And Caddy Jacks Knits podcast are doing a cal for this particular wrap, and it's called the Half Wrap Cal, and I highly recommend that you go and check that out. There's lots of people participating, and even although it's a very large knit, it's the cal has got a long period of time to complete it. I think it's a year, so you would have plenty time. The whole point of it is to really relax into the meditative joy of garter stitch, so you might want to explore that. The second thing that I've been knitting is this, the Letho by Natasha Hornby, and you probably remember I mentioned this in last week's podcast also, because I was so excited about the pattern when it released that I ordered it from my bed before I even got up that morning. And my intention had been to knit it in my lovely Nutiden yarn, which is an unspun yarn from Sweden, and it's just absolutely exquisite. I do think that it is my new favourite yarn. It's incredibly soft and and smells beautiful. Just everything about it is completely gorgeous. However, I realised that I actually didn't have enough to do it in my Nuta Den. So instead, I am knitting it in Let Lopi. So this is how far I've got. I've got one sleeve and I've started to work on the sides here. Oh dear, just lost 2 stitches. There we go. So it's a fascinating pattern. It uses lots of techniques. So if you're interested in exploring kind of a variety of techniques, then I think this could be the pattern for you. It starts with a brioche cuff, and then it moves into these welts, and you'll see that one of my little contrast colours here is actually my Nuta Den, so I did manage to get some of it in there. And then we've got a little slip stitch section here, which I've done in my black Plitalopi. And then the other technique that I've done with this is there was a 2-way provisional cast on to create this length of fabric here. So then you are then knitting in 2 different directions. And I'm so pleased with how incredibly neat that is. I don't think you can see that join at all. So super pleased with how that's turning out. The yarn is a complete delight. This shade of Let Lopi is called Straw, and there's a real complexity, I think, to the Let Lopi shades, which is just a complete joy to knit with. So really enjoying this, and looking forward to seeing what comes next, because it's such an interesting construction. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it now. So that's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying doing that. So that's the Letho. Those are my 2 projects, but I do have a few things that are coming up. The first, now, if you follow me on Instagram, you may know that I knitted a jumper at the weekend. It's called the Kingston sweater, and it looks, this is not the one that I knitted, this is one of Tara Lynn Morrison's Ravelry page for the pattern. This is the Kingston. So it's a chunky jumper that's been knitted on 15mm needles, so very big fat needles, which is a delight. It's a raglan construction, as you can see here. I knitted mine a little bit longer and slightly longer sleeves. Now you're probably wondering why I'm not showing you mine. Well, I can show you mine. This is mine. Uh-oh. Rather embarrassingly, when I blocked it, when I soaked it and took it out of the water, I thought, obviously wasn't thinking clearly, because I thought, oh dear, that's very, very wet. Maybe I could pop it in the washing machine for a quick spin. And when I took it out, it was felted and tiny. So I had maybe about, I don't know, an hour or so feeling very sorry for myself and really quite sad. And then thought, well, actually it's still kind of fabulous. So I don't know, maybe I'll make it into something else, like a bag or a cushion. If you've got any ideas, maybe you can share your ideas for what to do with the jumper that's been shrunk and felted. But there we go. The colours are glorious and I still love them very, very much. The yarn was Erica Knight for John Lewis in the super chunky in soft grey, coral. I think this was called Wine and Black. And this orange here was Drops Andes in orange. And my mohair was from Ezager and Drops to create a marl. So I was really, really pleased with it. It did only take, I think I cast on Saturday afternoon, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I finished it about 6 o'clock the following evening. So it really was a very, very quick knit. I really didn't spend very much time on it, because if I had, that would have been far more upsetting. But I do really love the jumper, and the design by Tara Lynn Morrison was just wonderful. It's the Kingston sweater. I'll put links to everything that I'm mentioning in my notes below, so if you want to follow up and find that for yourself, you can. So I am going to knit it again. I have ordered yarn, this time Cascade All Colours, 220 All Colours I think it's called, which is an Aran weight. I've ordered it in very similar colours that I knitted the first one in, but my intention this time is not to use any mohair and instead to marl my Aran weight yarn to get the super chunky weight. So I'll start with 2 strands of Aran in a light grey, and then get rid of 1 strand and introduce a strand of some beautiful bright coral called Shrimp, and gradually move my way through the colours that way. So I'll have a marl jumper that will be what I had before I shrank. This one. So sad, but it feels lovely. And it was a true lesson in joy, you know, because I did experience so much joy in the knitting process. I was so looking forward to wearing this jumper and really feeling the warmth and the coziness of it, and that is not meant to be. So my joy rests in the making of it, in the process, rather than in the product, which is always a helpful reminder, I think. So there you go. My what's next is another Kingston sweater, one that I will not be putting in the washing machine. The second thing that I'm going to be knitting is this. It's the Lord of the Isles, and it's the Kilt Socks by Kate Davies Designs. And I'm knitting this for my son. My eldest son turns 21 next month, and on his 21st birthday we gift him a custom-made kilt in a tartan of his choosing. So he's chosen his tartan. He chose the Black Watch, which has connections to the Grant clan, which is one of our lineage, and so that's already being handmade for him. It's all hand sewn, so that is in process. And when I give it to him, I want to be able to give it to him with a pair of handmade kilt hose. So I've bought this yarn here. So this is tartan green. If you know the Black Watch tartan, you'll know that it's like black, navy, and this shade of green here. This is West Yorkshire Spinners Essential DK. So they'll be quite heavyweight socks, but then that's absolutely appropriate for this kind of outfit. And I'm really excited to see him dressed in his kilt. It's a hugely significant moment, a real threshold, I think, the age of 21 as we move into fuller adulthood, and so I'm excited to celebrate that with him, and yeah, to see him all dressed up in his outfit. I will obviously take some photographs and share them with you if that's okay with him. I'll double check first, but I will certainly be sharing the socks. The pattern looks really interesting and I'm excited to get going with it, but it does require quite a few measurements because you have to measure not just the foot but also the calf and the length of the leg, and so I need to do some surreptitious measuring before I can begin on that. So that's exciting. The last things that I really want to share with you is what's bringing me joy right now. So we're really holding on to this focus from the Wild Kuan Yin Oracle. And what has been bringing me joy is more Nutiden. So Caroline and Knut had another release quite recently, and I bought this plate. And having received it, I've been kicking myself for not buying more because honestly this yarn is just, I'm going to try and hold it up so you can see the colour because I've got quite good light here, but you'll see like there's almost like, there you go, these kind of ultraviolet strands, and then these really lovely warm almost orangey peachy shades. There you go, there's a good. And again, just so soft and so beautiful. So I don't quite know what I'm going to do with it. Look at these two. Aren't they just glorious? So maybe they get knit together. I don't quite know yet. I was thinking, because the Between Petals is featured in the Letho, that it might be nice to do a lovely shawl, and so maybe these two together will become a beautiful shawl to wear with my Letho for those really, really chilly days. So that's bringing me a huge amount of joy. The other thing is a podcast that I discovered, an audio podcast, which my dad sent to me, and it's from the people of Emergence magazine, and it's all about spiritual ecology, which is a relatively new field to me, so I'm discovering a little bit more about it. But I listened to a wonderful interview with Richard Powers, the author who wrote Overstory, which is all about trees. It's a great podcast interview, and I will share the link to it so that you can follow up on that too. It was just so fascinating, and it really did, I think, give me a sense of time and connection and legacy and yeah, moving into a slower appreciation of life and the interconnections that weave us all together. And so I'm going to share that in the description box so that you can go and listen to that also, because I think it might bring you some joy too. The second thing is that, the third thing even, is that I started watching a series called Handmade in Africa, and it's by BBC4, so if you might be able to find it there or on the iPlayer. I do believe it's on YouTube, but I don't know how long it will be there for before it's taken down. But it's half an hour, I think it's half an hour, 20 minutes to half an hour, and it focuses on one very particular craft and one very particular maker, and you follow the process of their craft as they create a particular object. It is genuinely beautiful. They have done other programs that have featured different makers from different places. There's also a really wonderful one about embroidery in Mexico, which I think is also on YouTube, which you should really try and see too. It is a complete delight. But this very sort of close-in focus on the making process and hearing from the makers themselves how much they are investing into their craft and how much it means to them and how it sits within their sense of connection, both in terms of time, their legacy, their lineage, their past, but also in terms of present contemporary culture and how it binds a community together. So highly recommend that. And if you're watching Handmade in Africa, then you also must watch African Renaissance, Where Art Meets Power, which is also a BBC4 programme. It's only 3 episodes, each is an hour long. It's presented by a wonderful journalist called Afua Hirsch, who writes, I think, for The Guardian. She's a wonderfully warm guide to 3 different countries. The first one's Ethiopia, the second one is Senegal, and the third one is Kenya. Highly, highly recommend that you give them a watch. She covers so much art from such a long period of history. It's an incredibly interesting watch and really very fascinating. So that was bringing me a lot of joy also. And the last thing that's been bringing me joy, and this is what I want to close with you, is this wonderful poem by Mary Oliver. And it's called Don't Hesitate. And for me, it really has been a bit of an anchor, a touchstone, and a reminder of why joy is so important in our lives. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give into it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything. Be very likely you notice it the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. joy is not meant to be a crumb. Joy is not meant to be a crumb. And I know that there is so much challenge and hardship in the world right now. We are moving through the strangest, most troubling of times. And if you are struggling, then please know that I am thinking of you and that I'm sending you love, and that I'm hoping that at some point and in some ways that you are able to experience joy, and certainly more than a crumb. Okay, my loves, until the next time.